Hey everybody, it's Michael Shermer. It's time for another episode of the Michael Shermer Show. As always, brought to you by the Skeptic Society and Skeptic Magazine. We are a 501c3 nonprofit science education and research organization. So if you want to give us a little support and love, you can do that, supporting the magazine and the podcast and all our media events and research and Skeptic Research Center and so on. Go to skeptic.com/donate. If you want to get the issue, the latest issue, here it is, Culture Wars. We are quarterly, so every 3 months we crank out a new issue. We take on controversial subjects like culture wars or trans matters or abortion matters or education matters. We even took on nuclear energy. How about that? There we go. A lot of people are producing online magazines now. We do that, of course, because everything is digital these days, but we also continue to stay in print. You can find Skeptic at fine bookstores everywhere in North America, or we could just send it to you from the offices here in Santa Barbara of Skeptic Magazine. You can do that by going to skeptic.com/magazine. All right, enough of the commercials. My guest today is, hang on, let me get the proper introduction here of Sebastian Junger. He is the New York Times bestselling author of Tribe, War, Freedom, A Death in Belmont, Fire, and The Perfect Storm. You probably saw the film on that. Co-director of the documentary film Restrepo, which was nominated for an Academy Award. He's also the winner of a Peabody Award and the National Magazine Award for Reporting. Here is how a Wall Street Journal reviewer described him. Quote, Sebastian Junger has lived multiple lives and almost died in many of them. There was his accident while working for a tree-felling company that inspired him to research a book on dangerous jobs, which ultimately became The Perfect Storm in 1997. There was the time he almost drowned while surfing. Then there was his work as an embedded journalist in Afghanistan where machine gun fire missed him by inches. Later, there was the assignment he did not take to war-torn Libya, which claimed the life of his frequent collaborator and close friend, the British photographer Tim Hetherington. His new book, dedicated to Tim, by the way, is called In My Time of Dying, How I Came Face to Face with the Idea of an Afterlife. It's a book-length memento mori. Remember, you're going to die. Sebastian, you've had some close calls and you're still here with us. I'm glad to see you.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, that's a horrifying list when you add it all up. It's a little bracing even for me.
You're one of these kind of badass risk takers, right? Or no?
Well, I don't know. Well, thank you. I appreciate the compliment, and I'm not going to say that I'm badass because in my population pool of foreign reporters, I'm really at the low end of the risk takers, right? I mean, I've had some close encounters, but the people that I know that have been in the trenches for straight for decades, based in Baghdad for years, things like that, they completely eclipse the risks that I've run. So I just want to acknowledge that because I'm nowhere near those guys.
Yeah, okay. Sebastian, I have occasionally professional writers on the show. I mean, most of my guests are scientists who are researchers by trade. You are a professional writer, and you are a really good writer. So I'd just like to ask people, how did you become a good writer? What do you recommend if somebody says, I want to do what you're doing? I want to write best-selling books that are compelling and people love, and they make movies about them.
Well, thank you. I'm very flattered, and for me, it's been the honor of my lifetime to be able to make a living as a writer and to have people think that my work is of value. I couldn't have imagined such a thing when I was 20. Part of being good at anything is the sort of roulette wheel of talent. And I don't, I'm a terrible musician, and I didn't get that. But I got writing, and then the other things I didn't get. And we're all that way. And so I would say that I feel like the good musicians that I know, I have a certain intuitive feel for language that is compelling to read. I don't know how to articulate that part of it any more than that, any more precisely than that. But what I will say is that the part of my work of my writing skill that has been learned, which is a huge part of it, has been from reading other really good writers and studying them and trying to figure out why their writing is compelling to me. I never took a journalism class or a writing class in college. I really am sort of self-taught, but self-taught by the masters, John McPhee, Peter Matheson, Cormac McCarthy. I mean, the list sort of goes on and on.
Mm.
So what I would do if I were you and you wanted to write is, starting when you're about 16 years old, read the best work that you can and read it obsessively and underline. Do not read on a Kindle or listen to an audiobook. Read hard copies of books so you can underline passages so that you know which bits you want to go back to study. How did he or she do that?
I did that here.
Oh,
I,
exactly. There you go. Yeah.
I dog-eared your yeah, John McPhee. I love John McPhee. I discovered John McPhee through Stephen Jay Gould, who was one of the people I read everything he wrote because I just loved his writing style. And then I flipped open to John McPhee, and his opening passage, I forget which book it was to capture the idea of deep time is that the tip of Mount Everest is marine limestone.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. McPhee's unparalleled. A friend of mine is Alec Wilkinson, who's another classic, amazing American writer. I'm rereading his book, Moonshine. He writes for the New Yorker a lot. And Alec is just a perfect example of this crystal clear, direct, robust, sort of American style nonfiction prose. And it's a pleasure to read.
I'm going to read a portion of your last page of your book here. Usually I start at the beginning, but I'm going to start here at the end where you talk about being on a camping trip with your father when you were 16 or 17 years old. And there's a nice picture of him with you as a young man, shirt off, got some kind of medallion around your neck. Your dad looks like a badass guy too. I love that picture.
Thank you.
After a while, he said he was tired and he lay back and closed his eyes. I sat there watching his chest rise and fall until I was sure he was asleep. I'm now much older than he was that night, and I finally understand how much my father must have trusted me on that trip, how much he must have loved me. We're all, wow, we're all on the side of a mountain, shocked by how fast it's gotten dark. The only question is whether we're with people we love or not. There is no other thing, no belief or religion or faith. There's just that, just the knowledge when we finally close our eyes. Someone will be there to watch over us as we head into that great soaring night. Wow. First of all, that's great writing. Again, as an example of that, a touching tribute to your father. Let me just give you my impression of the book overall. When Ray Kurzweil, he produced there was a documentary about his work to essentially resurrect his father. The film is called The Transcendental Man, or Transcendental Man. And, Ray has this idea we're going to hit the singularity in 2040 or so. We're going to merge with the AI, and we can bring back people that we've lost. And most of the film is about his father, who died at age 51, I think. And Ray has this whole basement full of stuff about his dad, and he wants to put all of it into an AI and be able to interact with his father again. I remember thinking at the end of this guy really has some unfinished business with his father. And maybe we all do. And I got to thinking that at the end of your book. It's like, your dad is in this book a lot. And that's important to you, obviously.
Yeah. So let me just explain that last passage. It was at a moment when I was a teenager. I went into the woods a lot. I went backpacking and camping a lot in some pretty wild areas. My father grew up in Europe, born in 1923, classically educated in pre-war Europe. He was a physicist. He was not an outdoorsman. He had never slept outside in his lifetime, right?
Wow.
I mean, how French can you get, right? So when I was a teenager, I said, listen, come camping with me in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. And it turned out to be a rather raw weekend. And we were pretty isolated, and it got dark and it got extremely cold, and he got hypothermia. And he stopped being able to function very well, and I had to take care of him. And the parent and child roles were suddenly reversed. And I was sort of, I built a fire. He knew nothing, right? I built a fire. I put him in a tent. I made him some soup, and I revived him enough so that he could resume sort of being my father, and I could go back to being his son. But for a while, it was reversed. That was the circumstance there. And I end the book with that, because the book is about an incident where I had a medical crisis. I'm a healthy man. I've been a lifelong athlete. My pulse is 60 beats a minute, whatever. I'm not a walking heart attack, right? And I was felled by an undiagnosed aneurysm in my pancreatic artery, which is this little artery. And there was a slight disturbance in it, a ballooning of the artery wall that was a product of a sort of abnormality in my abdomen. It was not the result of a poor health or a lifetime of sin. It was just simply like an abnormality, and it ruptured. And I started bleeding out into my own abdomen just as much as if I'd been stabbed by a knife, except I was bleeding internally. Very, very dangerous. That my mortality chances of dying were, around 70%, 70, if I got to the hospital quickly. And it took me an hour and a half to get to the hospital. And I got there, as one doctor said, you were on death's door, and maybe 10 minutes from dead. And while I was lying in the trauma bay, I was talking to the surgeon, to the doctor who was putting a needle through my neck into my jugular to transfuse me. And while he was preparing my neck to do that, a black pit, a black void opened up underneath me. And I was very scared because I was getting pulled into it. Now, I have to say, I'm an atheist, a lifelong atheist. I still am. I believe I'm a rationalist. I'm certainly not a sort of mystical or spiritual or any of those substitute words for religious, right? My father was a physicist and an atheist, et cetera, et cetera. And lo and behold, what happens? My dead father appears above me and invites me to sort of go with him into the beyond. And I had no idea I was dying, right? And so I was shocked by his invitation. I'm like, what are you doing here? And you're dead. Why would I go with you? I'm alive. Why would you possibly imagine I would want to go with you? And I said to the doctor, you got to hurry. You're losing me right now. I'm going. So my book is about, involves my father quite a lot because it is the most mysterious thing that's ever happened to me in my life. And I still can't quite explain it, but my book is a short attempt to at least have a conversation around what the possibilities are.
Yeah. Well, I think that was my point of bringing up the father importance of the story, because why would you see your father and not, I don't know, some other relative or your friend Tim, or, whoever, Jesus? Well, you wouldn't because you're an atheist, but
Right.
Something like that. Maybe see Carl Sagan or something.
Right. Or elephants or kangaroos. I mean,
Yeah.
come on, right? Like,
Yeah.
why would I see anything for that matter, right? I
Yeah.
mean, yeah. So I'm sorry, go on.
Well, no, but I mean, yeah. So what comes into mind is probably what's important to us. And, so Christians who have near-death experiences more likely to see Jesus. A Muslim will see, what's, oh God,
Allah?
space. Yeah.
Allah.
Well,
There.
Allah or Muhammad. Yeah.
Right.
Sorry, spaced out there. Something like that. I think the brain is probably concocting images, or they're being triggered from memory or something, of the most important things to us. Like the love theme there is very touching in your book. I mean, you really loved your father, and that really is probably the most important thing in life, is being loved and knowing that you are loved. And I do think that is part of the deeper religious quest in general, that we're not alone. There's something out there that knows we're here and cares about us. It seems to be a central theme in religion. I even think it's a central theme in the search for aliens and UFOs and all that. We're not alone.
Yeah. I completely agree with all that. My daughter, the wisdom of children. I cite this in my book. Very shortly before I almost died, which was 4 years ago, we were living in a very rural place in Massachusetts at the end of a dead end dirt road in an old house there's not even cell phone coverage, and the landline. If it rains, the landline doesn't work because the lines are old and they short out. And so that's where we were living when this happened. And, one day my daughter and I, at the time she was 3, we walked out 300 yards or so out of the woods to where the pavement starts. And we made she made chalk drawings, beautiful chalk drawings, rainbows and unicorns and all that stuff. And then we came home, and that night it poured rain. And next morning she said, Daddy, I wonder if the chalk drawings are still there. And of course I wasn't going to say, no, there's not a chance in hell, right? Like, it poured rain last night. I was like, no, let's go find out, right? So we took the we took the bucket of chalk and walked out to the road. And of course they were washed away. And my daughter said, she was so upset. And she said, Daddy, if the rain had known how beautiful they were, it never would have washed them away. And then she did an interesting, in other words, the universe, even she realizes the universe does not notice our heroic works, right? And we are very possibly alone. Even a child's chalk drawings don't have a chance, right? If that doesn't, we don't, right? For sure. But what did she do next? She started drawing the next set of chalk drawings, right? And there is really quite a profound lesson for me. It's like the value of what we do in life is in the doing of it. And if it gets washed away in the end, no matter, right? Like that shouldn't deter us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, the second law of thermodynamics or entropy means the universe is running down and
Yeah.
just bad things happen. There's just more ways for things to go wrong than go right. Good metaphor here is the sandcastle at the beach. There's only so many ways to push those grains of sand into a beautiful castle. There's an infinite number of ways for them to be washed away and run over by dogs and small children and waves and wind and so on. And so here's my thoughts on why the self-help movement continues to succeed, even though, like, the number one predictor of who would buy a self-help book is people who already bought a self-help book. Well, if they work, why do you need to keep buying them and put the posters up and listen to the tapes every day and the Tony Robbins this and that? And the answer seems to be because tomorrow's a new day and you have to start over. You got to work out again. You worked out today, well, good for you, but tomorrow you got to do it again, or else, your body's just going to run down. The chalk drawing will be washed away. You just have to do it again.
And let's just acknowledge that it's pleasurable to make chalk drawings. Imagine if they weren't washed away, right? There'd be no more room for chalk drawings. If no one died, there'd be no more room for more people, right? It has to be washed away so that we can have the pleasure of the experience. Likewise, with reading self-help books, I have to imagine that the people that feel they need them take some pleasure in the work on one's life, on one's soul, on one's heart that these books engender, and that it's pleasurable to read another person's take on the same task. And people read the Bible over and over again. And I'm an atheist, but I'm certainly not anti-religious practice. And if people find joy and consolation in reading the Bible, I'm all for it. For that.
Well, and they do. And yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. And, religious people donate more blood and money and time to nonprofits, and they live slightly longer and healthier lives, not because God is rewarding people, but because, having a family, a social structure, a family of church-going friends, that you see every week to remind you to go to the doctor, and we're praying for you is another way of saying you are loved and cared for. And that makes a difference.
Absolutely. They found that people can withstand more pain if they're holding hands in a circle.
Right. Did you come across terror management theory when you were researching your book? This is the one where that awareness of our own mortality leads people to be more creative and productive and create the kind of great achievements of civilization and so on.
Oh, I'm writing more and more the older I get. Yeah.
Yeah. That's right. Cramming for the final.
I'm cramming for the final. Yeah, exactly. There's a wonderful book called The Worm at the Core.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And absolutely extraordinary book. And so, yes, I did encounter that theory. It makes sense to me.
Yeah. When you have been giving talks so far since the book has been out, since your conclusion is different from that of other people who write books like this, I'm thinking of people like Eben Alexander, whose book is called Proof of Heaven. And I've been on several shows with him, and he's a super smart, nice guy. But people, they expect him at the end to say, "Yeah, you get to go to the afterlife, and it's beautiful. You're loved, and it's beautiful people, and the colors, the sound, everything was great." But you're not making that conclusion. So how have you been received so far on that front?
Well, I can't conclude something that I can't offer proof for. And I haven't read Mr. Alexander's book, but if there were proof is a high standard. Evidence. I'd even take evidence of an afterlife, right? And which would make me consider the possibility, which I do in my book. And I'm actually not quite sure what my vision constitutes. Does it constitute strictly a hallucination, or does it reflect something about a quantum reality in the universe that we just don't understand? I'm even agnostic, forgive the term, but I'm even agnostic on that, right? Because I can't prove it either way. It's a fascinating conversation. The thing that I love doing with journalism and with people like yourself or anyone who will have me, is to have a fascinating conversation. But when you start talking about proof, as a journalist, I just can't go there unless I can deliver the goods. And but I will tell you this, having been in the publishing business for a long time and having had all kinds of conversations with knowledgeable people in the publishing business about what to call my book and how to position it. If you want to sell a lot of books, promise people that you will prove there's an afterlife and that you almost died and now you've come back with the goods and here it is. So rest easy, everybody. Nothing to fear. You're going to be like relaxing on a celestial hammock for the rest of eternity after you pass, and probably with the people that you loved, and so if you want to sell a lot of books, sell them that and they'll buy them. But I'm not in the book selling business to sell books. I'm in the book selling business to try to talk intelligibly and clearly and honestly about things we don't understand and need to know a bit more about.
Yeah. Well, you did that very effectively. And what we're talking about here is anomalies. So there's always a residue of anomalies that no theory in any field explains completely. So, the question is, what do we do with these anomalies? And the tendency is the human mind is, well, we got to explain everything or else,
Yeah.
We're in trouble. Well, no, you don't. It's okay to just, appreciate the weird things that happen. We don't have a full explanation. Here's some possibilities. Now let's just let it sit with that. Why do you think people just are not comfortable with that sort of level of, well, I don't know. It could be this, could be that, and then end of story.
Well, the quantum physicists are fairly comfortable with it, not that they have any choice, but there is a certain level of mystery or anomaly at the quantum level that seems paradoxical. It seems contradictory to what we understand about the macroscopic world. And so I think I think they're driven wild by, a chase for answers, but I think they are comfortable with anomalies because it's just one of the risks of the trade. I think human beings with their fears and their longings, I think what they want are clear answers that address the things that strike terror into their souls. And frankly, I'm sympathetic. I'm just as capable of being terrified as the next guy. And I spent after I almost died, I had a very strange experience 2 nights prior that I had a dream where I was dead. I was in my dream. I was a spirit. I had no idea I had anything wrong with my body, right? And I had a dream that I was a spirit, that I was hovering over my family, trying to get their attention because they were crying and they couldn't hear me. They couldn't see me. And I was made to understand that I already died and I was a spirit. And that was the end of that. And I was just heading out into nothingness. And I was so anguished that I woke up. We co-sleep. I woke up next to my eldest daughter. I sort of clutched her like she was a stuffy or something, right? Like, oh my God, thank God that was a dream because it was so realistic. 36 hours later, that's exactly what was happening. So when I managed to survive this catastrophe in my abdomen, I lost 2/3 of my blood. I needed 10 units of blood. My odds of surviving were extremely small. And when I got home, I started researching NDEs, near-death experiences, and there's thousands of accounts, um, and one of the most common experiences is seeing a dead relative or a dead friend or someone dead from your past sort of greets you like it's okay, come with me, right? Or says no, turn back, and one of the other most common experiences is hovering over your family or over your own body in this surreal way. And so I did this research. I'm like, oh my God, I know nothing about all this stuff, right? I'm not Christian. I'm not mystical. I'm not culturally groomed for this sort of thing. I had no idea I was dying, and I was horrified to see my father. He was not a source of consolation. He was a source of horror. So maybe the dream was me dying in my sleep. Maybe it wasn't a dream. Maybe it was my actual experience of dying. And this is all in the weeks that have passed since that. Going to the hospital and then coming back, and here I am in my living room with my daughter on my lap. It's all a dying hallucination, and I don't know it. And it struck a kind of terror in me, a kind of existential doubt that no close calls in combat ever even touched. The level of trauma of that was, and apparently this is quite common with people who have almost died. They don't think they're alive. They start to doubt that they're actually alive. And then once you doubt if you're alive, you doubt absolutely everything. And you can send yourself into a kind of existential madness. And it's exactly what I did. And it took me a long time to climb my way back out.
Yeah, I wonder if your brain was becoming aware of what your body was telling it, so to speak, that you were dying. You just didn't know it, so it comes through in the dream. Much like dreams are triggered by, if you got to pee in the middle of the night, you have dreams about having to go pee, or if you're super relaxed in a kind of a beta wave state and your muscles are relaxed, you feel like you're floating or flying. So floating, flying dreams are very common because that is kind of the state your body's in
Right.
that prone position. Maybe it's something like that. I mean, I'm just speculating here. Your body's sending these signals. You're not consciously aware of it, but it comes through in this dream.
Yeah, I talked to a palliative care doctor out of Harvard, and he was like, "Look, your body could communicate with your unconscious mind, your subconscious, and your subconscious communicates with the sort of moron upstairs by sending dreams and such to try to get his attention." And I ignored everything, and until it actually started happening. I attributed the dream. I talked to my wife about it because it was absolutely terrifying. I attributed it to, just I'm an older dad. My first daughter was born when I was 55, and a general fear of mortality. What was weird though is that, and again, I'm not positing like a quote afterlife. I'm just truly just saying this is what I found weird was that my dream would so closely replicate the NDEs that people have had. And what struck terror in me was the similarity with something I didn't know about. That's what sort of unsettled me.
You were 55 when you had your first child?
Yeah,
Way to go, man.
thank you.
But I got you beat. Well, my first child was born when I was 37, but I now have an 8-year-old son and I'm 69. So,
But listen, it takes a while for us skeptics to procreate.
That's right. That's right. Yes. Okay. Let me read another passage here from your book. My father died of congestive heart failure at 89, and a few days before he passed, I was awoken in the middle of the night by a similarly inexplicable dream. He was in Boston, I was in New York, and yet I was ripped from my sleep by him screaming my name as if he were in the next room. I sat up and glanced in confusion at the clock. It was 3:15 in the morning. Eventually, I went back to sleep, but I was awoken a few hours later by a phone call from my mother. She told me to get to Boston as fast as possible because my father had tried to throw himself out of the bed. Okay, that's another one of these pretty interesting things. How do you interpret that, or how do you think about that?
Well, yeah, and he tried to throw himself out of bed at 3:15 that morning.
Yeah, yeah,
Right, it was simultaneous, right?
right.
So, I don't try to interpret it. I say it's possible that there's a kind of meaning making that humans do with things that are pure coincidence. And oh my God, your birthday is the same as my grandmother's. We're meant to be together, that kind of thing, which I don't have much patience for. The precision of this and the startling effect of this dream, to me, had more. It gave me more to think about and talk about than like a very shallow coincidence like a birthday. Um, but or which is what my father believed, and he was, again, he was a physicist and the ultimate sort of rationalist. He said, "Look, we don't know where the human brain is on the spectrum of all possible intelligence. Like we might be at the 99, at the certain 99% mark, where just if we were a little bit smarter, we would be at theoretical maximum intelligence. It's not physically possible to be smarter than the human brains that we have. It's just not possible. And so what we can figure out will be 99% of what's capable of being figured out in the universe, right? We could be at 2%, right? I mean, yeah, like, and his feeling about things like what we call telepathy, which is an experience that virtually everyone has, and it's sometimes quite mysterious, the sort of simultaneous thoughts and things like that. I just talked to a young man who said that he was woken up very abruptly in the middle of the night by a beloved grandfather of his coming to him saying, "It's okay. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to miss you." And, it was like, I don't know what time it was. It wasn't 3:15, but at 2:10 in the morning, whatever it was. He checked the clock and he got the same kind of thing. He got the call from his mother. Granddad died at 2:10. right? And, other side of the country. So there's things like that actually it's reasonable to have an open-minded conversation. What the hell is going on, right? And I don't think it's reasonable to have a conclusive answer, but it's certainly reasonable to ask the question, right? And so what my father said about all this, he said, I think there's modes of communication between human brains that the human brain might not be smart enough to even understand, right? And the analogy I give in my book is that I don't think the brain of a dog is sufficiently evolved to understand what a television is, right? It takes the images on the screen literally. It can't conceive of the larger world that produces those images. And there's really no saying that the images that we see in reality, that we understand the wider context for those images any better than the dog does with the television screen. Like there's no reason to have confidence that we even are capable of even 2% of the total knowledge of the universe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just thinking of Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose's quantum consciousness theory, in which they speculate that the microtubules inside neurons, you're familiar with this, the wave function collapses at the quantum level inside these microtubules, and therefore you get this kind of patterned firing of neural networks that could then affect the quantum field and therefore affect your pattern of thoughts and neural networks and so on. Now, I'm pretty skeptical of this theory. I mean, it's possible, but I always bring it up as a point that there's no such thing as the paranormal or the supernatural. Yeah. There's just the normal, natural, and stuff we don't have yet explanations for. So if it turned out that people really can read each other's minds, telepathy really is real, and that was the explanation. It's some kind of quantum field effect. Then that would just be part of physics and neuroscience, quantum neuroscience or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that we haven't proved or disproved it yet may reflect on the limitations of our brains.
Yeah, I do think sometimes that about the Mysterians. These are the philosophers that think there are some things that are insoluble. We will never solve them because our brains are just not big enough.
Yeah.
If we had brains, 10 times the size, we'd understand dark matter or why there's something rather than nothing, or consciousness or something like that.
Well, whales do, right? Whales do have brains 10 times our size.
Brains, yes, but they have big bodies too. But yeah, adjusted for body size, some of the cetaceans are comparable to us.
Yeah.
But they don't have thumbs. They don't have, they're not on land, So let me give you, your dream experience is actually pretty common. So, I don't know, maybe a decade or so ago, one of my Scientific American columns, I wrote about those death dreams. And so here's my back of the envelope calculation of how to think about this. The average person has about 5 dreams per night, or 1,825 dreams per year. If we remember only a tenth of our dreams, then we'll recall 182 and a half dreams per year. Let's say there are 300 million adult dreaming Americans who thus produce 54.7 billion remembered dreams per year. Sociologists tell us that each of us knows about 150 people fairly well, the so-called Dunbar number after Robin Dunbar.
Yep.
Thus producing a network social grid of 45 billion personal relationship connections. With an average annual death rate of 2.4 million Americans per year, all causes, all ages, it's inevitable that some of those 54.7 billion remembered dreams will be about some of the 2.4 million deaths among the 300 million Americans and their 45 billion relationship connections. In fact, it would be a miracle if some death premonition dreams did not come true. Here's an announcement you'll never hear on television. Next up on the show, we'll introduce you to a woman who's had numerous death premonition dreams, not one of which has come true yet, but stay tuned because you won't want to miss her incredible story.
Yeah, and what I was doing with that was the frame of reference for me wasn't those numbers, and you're absolutely right about all that. How many people decide, change their airplane reservation, and then the airplane goes down, right? I mean, of course that stuff happens all the time. It was in the context of my life. What was deeply unnerving was the proximity. I mean, I'm 62, right? I've had however many dreams that is in my lifetime. I've never, ever, ever had a dream where I was dead, right?
Yeah.
And the one that I had immediately preceded the one time in my life that I almost died. And that's the part that was unnerving. And again, I'm not claiming, the most likely explanation is that the body has a kind of knowledge that it transmits however it can to the moron upstairs, and it resorts to dreams when it has to. And I'm perfectly fine with that. for me, the importance of that dream was what it did to me psychologically afterwards.
Yeah.
It presented the possibility that we know nothing, and that was me dying, and now I'm in a terminal hallucination, and there actually is no way to disprove that. I wish there were.
Yeah. Well, and that does seem to be a common theme. Again, back to the love theme that comes up with a lot of NDEs, but also people who do ayahuasca and some of the other mind altering drugs. I've never done this, but most of the people that do it swear that it opens the doors of perception.
Right.
Like Huxley's famous book title, that there is this other world there. The problem I have with it is, as a materialist, well, what do I do with that? How do I know that what you're telling me is real? And your answer is, well, if you take the ayahuasca, you'll see that. You'll see the spirit beings. So, yeah, but okay, but it's still in my head. How do I get out of my head to see if it's it? And there seems to be no ultimate answer to that. Well, you can't.
No,
and I don't know what to do with that other than to say, well, that's really interesting. Maybe.
Right. I mean, I interviewed a wonderful man named Christoph Kalk, who's
I know Christoph.
Yeah. So
I just had him on the show talking about his book. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic! I haven't had a chance to read it yet.
Yeah, he recounts his dying experience there, taking the toad, was it, or something like that? It's a strong hallucinogen.
Right. Yeah. So I haven't read it yet, but what he said, it was quite wonderful, because I adore science and the humility of science. And the way I've divided things up in my mind is that there's stories and there's explanations. And we need stories because existence and the universe is a scary place. And the stories give us a kind of comfort of belief in a God or an afterlife or whatever it may be. And is there enduring importance of the life we lived and the work that we did or whatever it may be. But you can't test a story, right? I've never met a religious person who said, I know this is God and here's how you prove it. You go out and do this. You mix, saltpeter with water with, whatever, and then you stir it up and then poof, whatever it would be like that. There is no, and that's what makes it a story. Explanations, it's not an explanation if there isn't a test for it. And you really don't want to, mock the stories by testing them. And you don't want to disrespect the explanations by not testing them. Humans really sort of need both. I need an explanation for why airplanes fly before I get into one. If someone gives me a story about why they fly, well, God will keep us safe. Like, I'm not getting onto it, right? And I don't think I really would want to be part of any religion. I mean, I'm an atheist, but I don't think I'd want to be part of any religion that pretended to offer a proof of heaven. Sorry, not interested. I want to believe in something that can't be proven. That's the kind of thing that will treat the emotional emotional needs that I have in this difficult and sometimes terrifying existence.
Yeah. My next book, called Truth, I deal with some of these different kinds of truths. And I think what you're tapping there is the reality of something like mythical truths or psychological truths or even literary truths, And my point, like, was there really four brothers Karamazov in 19th century Russia? No, you're missing the point of the story.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Or is there did J.K. Rowling really expose the reality of the Hogwarts? No, it's just a made up story.
Yeah.
So to me, the whole Christian resurrection story is a story. It's a literary truth, a mythical truth.
Yeah.
But most of the Christians I meet and debate with, they insist, no, it has to be literally true. He was really dead for 3 days, not near death, not in some coma. And although there is a theory about that, if you want to go full Dan Brown, he was never dead, and he was whisked off to France with Mary Magdalene, and they started a family, and so on. But to me, to ask is it literally true is kind of miss the point of the story. Why can't we have stories that are just true at some deeper level?
And why does everyone elope to France, by the way?
I know. I don't know. Yeah.
Just curious.
I guess because of the wine and the romance. I don't know.
Yeah. And, well, those stories, I mean, that's fine. But, again, if someone's going to say it's literally true, if you want that to be believed as an explanation of reality, you need to offer the test for it. What's the test for it? Right. So the reason I wrote the subtitle as I did in my book is, how I came face to face with the idea of an afterlife. I don't for a moment claim there is or isn't an afterlife, right? Who am I? I don't know, and no one can know either for certain, right? But I certainly came face to face with the idea of it in the form of my dead father hovering over me, completely unbidden and unwelcome and uncomforting, and et cetera. This was not a moment of love and at all. And neither was it a memory I had of him. I have absolutely no memory of him hovering over me. Like, sorry, that's not something he was able to do, right? And if I had we used to go sailing together, right? If I suddenly had been in the sailboat with him, we're like, okay, yeah, the brain's getting triggered. I'm having in its trauma, in its sort of dying trauma, in extremis. It's this old memory from when I was 7 years old of sailing with him on a lovely summer day. Boom, there I am on the boat. Extraordinary. It doesn't mean that there's all time is simultaneous and I actually was on the boat. It means that my dying brain ginned up a comforting memory from my past. That is not at all what happened to me, and I wish it had. Right, what happened to me was way more troubling and vexing.
One of my favorite bumper stickers is militant agnostic. I don't know, and you don't either.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of things like that. Okay, some other thoughts reading your book. The third, sometimes called the third man effect or the sense presence. A lot of alpinists and solo sailors, dog mushers in the Iditarod, cyclists in the race across America that I did. They sense a presence. There's somebody else when I'm alone, in the tent or on the ropes, up on K2, whatever. There's a lot of accounts of this. The brain seems to produce. It's not just oxygen deprivation, because it happens to solo sailors too.
Yeah.
But particularly when you're stressed out, sleep deprived, alone, hungry, but especially anxious, a being appears that you talk to. Right. These people, they have conversations with the people.
Yeah, I've read about that. I didn't include in my book. I don't think they're dead. I don't think.
No, they're not dead. No, they're not dead. No, it's not a near-death thing. But but my point is that the brain is capable of producing this.
Yeah.
It's like sleep paralysis is probably our best explanation for alien abduction experiences, or in the Middle Ages, the encounters with demons and incubi and succubi. There seems to be some percentage, maybe 3 to 5% of people that have these waking dreams in which they wake up in the middle of their. The problem is the body is still super relaxed, and the muscles are all, basically relaxed, so they don't fall out of a tree if you're sleeping in a tree or whatever in our ancestors.
Right.
But the brain it becomes quite active. Paradoxical sleep, the rapid eye movement, and all that. And this is when dreams happen. So in this small percentage of people, they have a sense presence in the room. It's like a dark, amorphous figure that you can't quite make out a face or whatever, and they tend to be more threatening than friendly. And the people that experience it are very anxious, and they can't move. This is a paralysis. They're lying there awake, but they can't move their bodies, so they feel threatened by this thing in the room.
Right. Oh, of course. Yeah. I've read about that. It's extraordinary.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, there's just so much we don't understand about the brain that you're tapping into here in your book, that just kind of leaves us wondering. And do you think part of the problem is that we don't have a good explanation for consciousness? The hard problem of consciousness. We don't know what it is exactly.
I mean, the root of all of our ignorance might be that. I mean, entirely possible, right? Consciousness seems to affect, according to the quantum physicists, the behavior of the quantum world. And then there's some theories about, frankly, this universe we're in. Like, we don't know how consciousness relates to the universe at the quantum or the macroscopic level, and we don't have a clue, really, how the universe came into existence. Some theories, but why? Right? I mean, like, why are we here? I mean, the odds of us being here are so almost incalculably small. And by us being here, I mean anything at all. I mean a bunch of rocks, right? Forget about sentient beings. I believe it's 10 to the minus 270, if I'm remembering my own book correctly. It's something like that, right? It's like one chance in a number that has 270 zeros after it. And so I, I don't think if we can't explain if we can't explain why we exist in the first place and how it came to happen, I think there's going to be a lot of gaps in our knowledge in our more immediate circumstances as well. But again, I'm just guessing, right? It's like, I don't
Yeah.
know. I just live
Well,
here.
nobody knows. I mean, these to me are what I call known unknowables. Now, I may be wrong on this, but why is there something rather than nothing? The origins of the Big Bang and what triggered the thing to bang in the first place. Is there a God? Free will and determinism, and then the hard problem of consciousness. When I had Christoph on the show, I pointed out, like in terms of like the Big Bang theory versus the steady state theory, they were in competition for a few decades, but the Big
Right.
Bang theory won out. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
I said, all right, so how come you guys, you neuroscientists, don't have like one or two theories? Because if you go on the Wikipedia page, you type in, hard problem of consciousness, there's like a dozen or 15 different theories, right?
Right.
Well, how come you guys have 15 different theories? Something tells me there's something wrong with what you're doing. And he said, look up the Wikipedia page for quantum physics and the different interpretations of quantum physics. And there's like 15 different theories. I'm like, oh, okay, good point.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, that might be, the 15 things on the Google search might be a clue for the fact that you're getting close to something that's not knowable.
Yeah.
I mean, that might be one of the signs. It's like, oh yeah, there isn't two. There's 15 theories, right? And so, I mean, I don't know. The idea, science is wonderfully arrogant, and which has propelled it to great, incredibly deep levels of knowledge. But one of the conceits is that surely everything ultimately is knowable if we just keep working at it, right?
Yeah.
And I think
Maybe not.
it may not be true, right? Maybe that if the human brain did understand everything, that it might actually corrupt the existence that we're experiencing. We may require a certain amount of ignorance for us to sort of exist in this state at all. I mean, we don't know anything about anything in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like you'd want that kind of certainty to continue on, but we have to live with that on a level of uncertainty. And I don't know, there's something about consciousness that because we experience it, it's like when you die, where does the digestive process of your pancreatic digestive process go when you die? It doesn't go anywhere. It's just a process.
Right.
And so if you think of the mind as just what the brain does when it's processing information or whatever it's doing, it's just working. It doesn't go anywhere. It's the same place it was before you were born. Where do you go after you die? Same place you were before you were born. But that's a bit of a distractive answer on my part, because there's something different about consciousness than any other.
Yeah.
Where does your heartbeat go when your heart stops beating? It's a ridiculous question.
Right.
But consciousness feels different than that.
Yeah, and the question is, does consciousness require a consciousness, capital C, not my consciousness, but consciousness as a phenomenon, like gravity as a phenomenon, right? Consciousness as a phenomenon doesn't require a brain in order to exist, or is it like gravity, just sort of out there in the universe in some form that we don't understand, and it's actually part of the required component of the universe itself. Schrodinger, who, since you read my book, you'll know that my family has a very strange and a slightly salacious relationship with the man.
Tell us that. Yeah, no, review that. That's a great story.
Yeah, so my father grew up in Europe, and his aunt, his mother's sister, that family was from Salzburg, and there were two twin girls, and then another girl who was my dad's mom. And the twins, all three girls, were known for being very, very beautiful. And high school comes along, or whatever it's called in Austria, in around 1916, and
maybe gymnasium, right?
Gymnasium. Yes, there you go. Absolutely. And the twins are failing math, right? They're failing whatever you learn at age 16. I don't even remember. What is it? Algebra? Whatever it is.
Something like that.
So they call a family friend who knows something about numbers, Erwin Schrodinger, to help tutor the girls, right? And the Schrodinger's wife says, "Oh, of course, have them spend the summer with us in Germany." And so the girls will go off to math camp with Erwin Schrodinger, and Erwin tutors them well enough so they pass their tests. But he was an inveterate dog and had affairs all over the place, as did his wife, by the way.
Oh,
And and uh, and he fell in love with one of the girls. He was in his early 40s. She was 16 or 17, something like that. And he fell in love with my great aunt Edie and had a passionate affair with her for many years. Even got her pregnant at one point. The pregnancy was terminated. So that's my family connection with Schrodinger, the great Schrodinger, and one of the pioneers of quantum physics. And I was sort of startled to read in his biography. Um, there's a wonderful, thick biography of Schrodinger. I can't remember the name of the author. Is fantastic, and it's about 500-600 pages. And my father, I found it in my father's belongings when he died, and there was a bookmark in it for where my father had whatever section he'd recently reread. And the bookmark was a love letter that Schrodinger had penned to his aunt E.T. And he was using that letter, like handwritten by Schrodinger, a terrible, terrible purple prose sort of like love poem. That was the bookmark in the Schrodinger biography. Anyway, I was surprised to find out that Schrodinger believed in a kind of universal consciousness, and one sort of rooted in Eastern mysticism. And he's a very smart guy, yeah, obviously. So, I was sort of startled by that, maybe a touch of sentimentality to him.
oh yeah. I mean, all that stuff that you review at the end of your book there is so interesting. I belong to this kind of private email group that Deepak Chopra runs that is filled with people like that, and they quote Schrodinger a lot and some of these other physicists because of what it touches on upon the problem of consciousness. Other people in this group, Philip Goff, who promotes panpsychism, Gustav Koch, Bernardo Kastrup, Stuart Hameroff, Penrose, and so on. Most of these people, they think consciousness exists separate from the substrate. It's
Right.
substrate independent, I think is the phrase they use. So having a brain, yeah, we have to have a brain for consciousness,
Right.
much like you have to have a radio in the room to get the radio signals coming in from out there. And this panpsychism thing has kind of taken off. There's been a number of books about it. I'm astonished at the level of which the people who think that consciousness exists without brains is becoming quite popular.
Yeah, I mean, listen, those are some illustrious names, and again, it has the virtue of being undisprovable. So,
Yes, right. Oh, you talked about Hoffman, Donald Hoffman. I had him on the show too, and
yeah,
yeah, he makes appearances at these Deepak conferences that I occasionally go to. He's got a very interesting theory. His forget what's it called now. It's like the icons on the computer screen represent something inside, but if you look inside, you're not going to see the little trash can in the computer, or whatever.
right.
And that, but I'm sorry, Donald, if you're listening to this.
I tried to read that. I tried to read that paper. I mean, there's some of those papers. I just turned back at the foothills. Right. I'm like, I'm going back to the chalet. I can't climb this mountain. It's not happening. I'm going to die on its upper slopes. Like, I'm going home.
That's a great metaphor. I know some of that's like that too. I felt that way reading Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning. It's like I DNF'd after about 4 hours on the audio version. But he's another one of these kind of a modern day Joseph Campbell. There's these mythical truths. And back to the resurrection. If you ask Jordan, do you think the resurrection really happened? I mean, there's this guy named Jesus. He was literally dead for 3 days. He's like, you're asking it the wrong way. It's like, are you asking me, did Jesus exist and come back to life like I can see this mug? No, I'm not saying that. Well, then what are you saying? And that it carries this mythic meaning or whatever. I think your point here is that if you can't ultimately test it, it's not falsifiable. But it's not, we don't need to just throw it out completely and say, well, therefore it has no meaning or we shouldn't think about it. It's just on a different plane or different level.
I mean, just because it's not falsifiable doesn't mean it's not useful to us on an emotional and a human level, right?
Yeah.
And Yeah, I have a friend who's so I'm as I said, I'm an atheist, lifelong, and I happen to be a Democrat, fairly liberal, right, within bounds, within reason, right.
These days, you have to qualify it.
Absolutely, and I'm mortified with some of the
I know.
ideological
I know.
excesses of
Yeah.
my brothers and sisters out there on the fringe, right? Um, and likewise, good conservatives are, I think, horrified by the excesses of their brothers and sisters in the fringe. I mean, I get it, right? So a friend of mine is both Catholic and conservative and very smart. And so she's a sort of fascinating study for me of how the conservative religious mind thinks about things, right? Because she's a smart cookie as well, right? So I always ask her questions, because like, okay, how does this work for you? Like, can you make sense of this in your brain of what this like? And she's absolutely horrified by Trump, by the way. She voted for him, of course. She's absolutely horrified by what the GOP inflicted on the U.S. But at any rate, what I said to her, you guys do know, meaning sort of conservative Catholics, you do know that humans are, as it were, descended from apes, right? That our closest animal relative is chimpanzees, split off 6 or 7 billion years ago, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you guys do know that. Just tell me, signal, blink if you can hear me, like signal in some way that you do know that, right? And she sighed and she said, yes, Sebastian, we do know that. But in my circles, it's just considered rude to keep pointing it out. And that to me was such a wonderful, like, oh, okay, I get it. I get it. I don't want to make people uncomfortable. As long as like, I don't need to hammer this home, right? You don't want to be reminded of our animalness. I totally get it. Sometimes neither do I, right? And I think there's an equivalent. This is a real digression. But I think there's an equivalent on the left of course, there are biological differences between men and women, right? It's just considered rude to keep pointing it out. It's the same sort of thing. Can you just leave it alone for a while? We know that, we get it, right? But just stop rubbing it in our faces.
Yeah, I think there you can just define it as something other than an empirical truth. It's a political truth or religious truth or mythic
Right.
truth or something like that. Let me give Don Hoffman his proper credit. His theory is called the interface theory of perception, ITP, that he presents in his 2019 book, The Case Against Reality. Like most scientists, Hoffman rejects solipsism, the belief that only one's mind is known to exist. But unlike most scientists, he does not accept the model of veridical perception, which holds that natural selection shaped our senses to give us a reasonably accurate model of the world. Instead, ITP contends that percepts are a species-specific user interface, that was his term, that directs behavior toward survival and reproduction, not truth. Hoffman's computer analogy is that the physical environment is like the desktop, and the objects in nature are like desktop icons. Our senses, he says, form a biological user interface, a GUI, GUI, between our brains and the outside world, transducing physical stimuli such as photons of light into neural impulses processed by the visual cortex as things in the environment. GUIs, GUIs, are useful because you don't need to know what's inside computers and brains. You just need to know how to interact with the interface well enough to accomplish your task. Adaptive function, not veridical perception, is what's important. I like his point there.
I've already gone back to the chalet.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
Already turned back.
That's too funny. Well, let me tell you a story. I wrote one of my Scientific American columns. Out of the 214 I did, this got the most mail. And it was a story about a weird thing that happened to my wife and I on our wedding day. Now, my wife is Jennifer. She's from Cologne, Germany. And she moved to California to be with me, which is astonishing, but okay. Don't tell her this was a big mistake. Anyway, so, and she was raised by a single mom, no dad in the picture at all. So her grandfather was kind of a surrogate father for her. And, he died and she got some of his stuff, like his little transistor radio. Let's see. Here it is. So she was shipping her stuff to me from Germany, including this little 1977 Philips transistor radio. Okay. So I tried to get it to work for her. It had been dead for years. and I put new batteries in it, and I did the old, slap it on a firm surface to get it to work, and it wouldn't work, and I tried this, that, and the other. Anyway, then she moves here, and then we decide to get married, so we go down to the Beverly Hills courthouse and do our thing there. But then we have a little more informal ceremony with my family at my house in Altadena. But she had nobody there from her side, so she was feeling kind of lonely. And before we did a little ceremony, we go in the back room so she could have a quiet moment. And then all of a sudden we hear music playing from inside the desk. Now, I had thrown this radio in the desk like 6 months before. It was just in the back of the drawer. And, I'm thinking, what's that music? I don't have a stereo system in the house. Maybe I left my laptop, or maybe my iPhone is on. No, it's not that. It's not that. Maybe it's the neighbors. No, it's not that. And so I'm kind of looking around the room, and it's like the music is coming from inside the desk. That is weird. So I open the drawer and I pull out the radio, and it's playing music. I mean, it's perfectly tuned to a station. It wasn't static or whatever. And it's playing like romantic music. And, my wife and I are looking at Jennifer like, whoa. Now, she's an atheist. I'm an atheist. Like, whoa. It's like, now we don't. So I wrote about this in Scientific American, and I said, I'm not saying, Grandpa's in the room with us or anything like that. But there was something but the connection. Yes, there's probably some natural explanation, with the solenoid or the little energy left over. I don't know. Who knows what? People wrote me about this because I don't know anything about radios. But as Deepak pointed out, it's the timing, like with your dream.
Yeah.
It's the timing and the emotional connection and importance of the anomaly. And I'm okay just saying, I don't know what the actual explanation is, but it was a beautiful story, and it was meaningful to me and my wife.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, I think those coincidences are so startling or unnerving that they make life feel significant, right? And I think we need a sense of significance in our lives in order to lead our lives. And so I think if you want to talk sort of like evolution and adaptation, I mean, we adapted to lead lives of great struggle, right? Knowing that at the end of them, we're going to completely cease to exist. How do you get someone to do that? Right? Like you're going to work all year in the factory, and we're not going to pay you. Right? Like essentially, it's like forget it. You're not taking anything home from this, right? And one of the ways that evolution might have sort of coaxed the human brain, once it got the sort of foreknowledge of death that came with language and those higher cognitive functions, was by giving it the ability to see random coincidence as significant, to see themes and patterns, and so then all of a sudden the world that you see sort of pops with significance and beauty, and you're like, oh wow, there's real meaning here, right? Like I mean, this isn't just a random series of molecules stumbling through at 70 years. There's actually some real resonance with the entire universe going on with me and my beloved and whatever, right? And that may be the little card trick that evolution has had to gin up, along with the card trick of language and higher cognitive function to keep us plugging away at the factory without a paycheck.
That's such a great analogy. Yeah, I call that patternicity, tendency to find meaningful patterns in random noise. But in fact, a lot of patterns turn out to be real, right? Is global warming caused by CO2 gases or not? Well, there's a pattern. It looks like it is. So that's what science does, is tease out those meaningful patterns. I think in the ultimate questions that we can't answer with science, we're still finding meaningful patterns that may serve, again, as these kind of mythical truths.
Right.
That, whether it's literally true or not is kind of beside the point. It's true for me, and that's okay.
I had this realization when I was writing the book. I was reading about NDEs. I was in a very traumatized, fearful place, right? And I still had an abdomen full of blood. I almost died, I found myself sort of rooting for an afterlife as I read these, quite extraordinary and often very compelling and mysterious NDE accounts. I found myself thinking, whoa, boy, that sure is hard to explain. Maybe there's a chance, right? Like, and then I read the other side, the sort of rationalists are like, oh, well, the sort of party poopers always win, don't they? The rationalists, like my father, they always come in and rain on everyone's parade. But then I had this thought. There might be no greater hell than an eternal consciousness without exit. Like when you sort of wish for an afterlife, right? What are you really wishing for? I mean, you have no idea whether it's going to be pleasant or not. It might be sheer physical torture or psychic torture, but also just the idea of being conscious for eternity without exit. I mean, at least, if you need to, you can put a bullet in your head and exit this life, right? If you're in unbearable pain from cancer, or the Gestapo are coming to kill you, or whatever it may be, you can step off the train, you can exit. But in an afterlife, there clearly is no exit. And that, to me, seemed potentially absolutely terrifying and maybe something you shouldn't wish for. And then I had this sort of follow-on thought that there's sort of two perils here. And one is, if you not believed, not thought, but could prove that there is no post-death existence of any sort for the individual, the precipice we will all fall off of might be so terrifying that it's psychologically paralyzing during the course of our life. On the other hand, if you could prove, not believe, not think, but prove that there is an afterlife, an eternal blissful afterlife, a celestial hammock where you'll sort of relax in love and beauty and grace for eternity, it would threaten to strip the meaning, the struggle, the tragedies and the beauty and the defeats from these meager 60, 70, 80 years that we actually were given, right? And so where we can't quite prove it either way, might be whatever you or I, a skeptic or a believer, thinks is likely. No one can actually prove it absolutely either way, right? That might be a kind of epistemological sweet spot that allows us that compels us to lead meaningful lives while we're here on the planet, because we do know that we have our reality at the moment. So make the best of it, everybody, right? But doesn't paralyze us with terror, with the foreknowledge that all is for naught, and when we die, it's as if it never happened. And we might be in this sort of gray area sweet spot that allows us to live the most meaningful lives that would be psychologically possible for us. And that, to me, was a kind of compelling argument for kind of leaving things where they lay, as it were.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. One of my favorite authors on anything was Christopher Hitchens. Who toward the end of his life, he wrote a series of essays on this subject when he was dying.
Yeah.
And of course, he always made the point, I'm dying, but so are you. It's just a different time scale, right? Yeah. But, he described, this was actually before he was dying, the Christian heaven as celestial North Korea. Where you have this dictator that knows everything and knows everything you're doing and thinking is like, whoa, that doesn't sound good. Are you sure you want that?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then one of his essays, I think it was in Vanity Fair, he published these, and then they're collected in a book called Mortality, in which he talked about, it's like being at a party and you get tapped on the shoulder and say, you have to leave. And you're like, oh no. And guess what? The party's going to go on without you. Oh no. And everybody's going to be having fun and you don't get to be part of that. Yeah. Because I know how bad that sounds, but consider the alternative. You're at the party and you can never leave.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, well, wait a minute. There has to be some terminus to the party, or else.
No. You all got Hotel California, right? You got to stay. Sorry.
Yeah. Right. I want to check out. Nope. Yeah. Yeah. So, in Heavens on Earth, I wrote about this. Let's think this through carefully, and not just the Christian or the religious versions, but scientific versions. You're going to upload your mind, the connectome to the cloud, and you get to live there forever. Well, what does that actually mean? To be a sentient being without a body, just a mind floating around in some vat somewhere or a cloud or something like that. And by the way, what would that be in the Christian heaven? You're up there with Jesus and God, or presumably the 3 in 1 or 1 in 3 or whatever it is. Right. But what are you there? Are you your physical resurrected body? There's some sects that think that is what will happen, to which I ask, well, how old are you? Yeah, and they actually have an answer. You're 30, because that's the age Jesus was. But also it's like the prime of your life or whatever. It's like, yeah, I was physically fit 30, but I was an idiot. Right. I'd like to know what I know now when I'm 30.
Slightly alcoholic, smoked a little too much. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Cheating on my wife. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that 30?
Yeah, not good. So, and eternity, as it said, it's a long time, especially toward the end. I mean, come on, what do you mean you get to live forever? You need the terminus there, I think, to add at least some meaning. Now, that said, how long would you like to live? Most people, I don't know, like 80, 90, but most people are thinking my body's going to fall apart and I'm just lying there in a bed and it's time to go. Okay. But what if, this is Ray Kurzweil's point, what if you're actually just like you are now, physically healthy, strong, you're active, you're full life with a family, and everybody's, every day is filled with interesting things, and tomorrow can be the same, and tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day. Wouldn't you want to just keep going as long as you could?
Well, there's some appeal for that because, like you, I'm an older dad, and the thing I'm most scared of now is dying before I've been able to give my daughters the father that they need. And I love them more than anything. And my wife, the family. And that's why I exist is because of that. Right. So I might take a little bit of that, right, for a little while. But really, do I want to continue existing? Someone said, if I could give you an 800-year pill, it means you can live as you are now for 800 years. Would you take it? I was absolutely not. Right. Like, I don't want to live to see my children die and their children die. And all the people I love die. And I continue sailing on alone, in my little, one-man sailboat across the oceans for 800 years. Like, thank you, no. Like, I'm going to stay with my people, right? My people are my generation of friends and loved ones and my children and my family. I mean, that's it, right? That's my tribe, as it were. That I wrote a book called Tribe about how community works and its benefits and what happens when we lose it. And it's one of those words like freedom and love, that's truth, that's very, very hard to define. It's a core, essential word to our lives, but very, very hard to define in a sort of sweeping way. And I tried to define tribe, and I couldn't quite do it. And finally, I came up with this. And one of those sort of off-center moments, like taking a shower or driving or something, I wasn't even thinking about anything, right? And this popped into my mind. Tribe is what happens to you happens to me. Like, that's tribe, right? And so if my people are going to die, I want to die, right? And I want to be with them as long as possible, and I certainly don't want to be on Earth without them.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful way to put it. That's true. Yeah, and countering like the transhumanists and the cryonicists and the mind uploaders and all that. A general sense I got is I wanted to tell these guys, and it's mostly guys, don't forget to live now. Don't forget about the here and now. I mean, they're constantly thinking about 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, I'm going to be doing this or that. It's like, well, don't forget tomorrow. Yeah. Like, pay attention. Yeah. There's a lot to live here, right? So even if there is an afterlife, you don't live in the afterlife.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. And that one of the things that I was sort of given by this, and it was hard won because, like I said, I went through psychologically a very, very tough time afterwards. And but one of the things that I did extract from it was this sort of understanding, like, it's happening now, man, like right now and right now and right now and right now. And when you lose touch with that, you're not really living. And it's like, I'm not religious. That's what I have instead of religion. It's this sort of understanding of like, whoa, right. Here it is. It's going on right now. Like, check it out.
Yeah. The death of your friend, Tim, and you dedicate the book to him. Is this kind of a way to keep a form of immortality? I'm remembering my friend and telling people about him, and I would want people to do that for me, and everybody should do that for somebody.
Yeah, it's dedicated to Tim and another dear friend of mine named John, both of whom passed far too early.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the best we can do as far as we know. Again, I'm happy to, close my eyes for the last time and open them up, and wow, everybody's there. My friends are there, and my parents, and my Carl Sagan, Stephen Jay Gould, Isaac Asimov, the amazing Randy, all these people that were my colleagues and friends, and like, there they are.
Right. Well, you know what? If we take the afterlife theory seriously, you don't just get the people you love; you get everybody. Right. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh no, Hitler. Goebbels,
oh no, there's Genghis Khan. Yeah, right.
Yeah, Genghis Khan. Right. Oh my God, how many virgins does he get in the next life?
Yeah. Right.
Oh my God, that's too much. Yeah. All right. Well, this has been really a great conversation. What are you working on next? What's next on your your agenda or trips,
You
adventures?
know, I didn't see this book coming until it happened, and I don't see the next book coming yet. So I just hope it's kind to me. I, I don't know yet.
I mean, but like, what are you working on? Like tomorrow, do you work on some magazine pieces or doing some
No,
research on it? No,
not even. I just came staggering out of book tour, and I'm spending the summer with my girls, with my family, and I love playing music. I play accordion. I practice a lot. I'm a really devoted athlete, and I love using my body. We live on a property that's part of it's an organic farm, and I do a sort of lot of physical work around the property. I used to be a climber for tree companies when I was young. When I was
right,
30, when I was 30,
right.
the age I would be in the afterlife, presumably, it means I would be spending my afterlife as a tree surgeon. Oh well. But I got all my gear, I got all the ropes and the whatever and chainsaws and so there's a lot of work like that to be done. It's a pretty big property. So
Yeah, yeah. You talked about that in the book, or was it on another podcast?
yeah,
The
it
tree.
was in the
Yeah.
book.
Well, because I listened to the audio version of your book, and at the athletic club I belong to here, they have these massive trees, and they decided a couple of weeks ago to cut them down, and the guys are like 100 feet up with
Yeah.
these ropes and pulleys and that. I'm just watching this, going, "Holy crap! This is really." It seems risky, but you describe it as a calculated risk.
It's not even a calculated risk. So that was what I used to do. I was the high climber. I did the aerial work for tree companies, and it's all physics, right? Like if you get killed up there, it's because you made a mistake. You know, if you're driving along and someone T-bones you at a green light, that's not your fault. If you're in combat, there's a lot of I mean, just walking down the street, everything's random, right? I talk in my book about a lady who woke up. There was a loud bang. Loud bang woke her up in the middle of the night. I think she lived in Alberta, Canada, or Ontario. And loud bang woke her up in the middle of the night. She turned on the light, and there's a meteor pillow next to
Oh,
her
right.
head.
That was
Right? It missed her
unbelievable.
forehead by a few inches, right? So random, everything's random, right? In tree work, it's actually not random. Like it's like chess isn't random. If you lose a chess game, it's because you lost, man. You just made bad moves, right? You didn't roll, wasn't a bad roll of the dice. It wasn't a bad card. You just made bad moves and the other guy didn't. And likewise with tree work. So what I liked about it is this tremendous sense of agency. Like it's dangerous if I make a mistake. It's completely safe if I don't. And that to me was absolutely intoxicating.
Yeah. I know what you should do for your next book, longevity, right? Just do a good journalistic dive into what we know and what we don't know. I've been reading a lot about this for the same reason you've been thinking about it. Like I'm an older dad and I want to keep going. So my little guy has a dad till he's in his at least 20s and 30s. That would be nice. How do I do that? Okay. So obviously exercise, no smoking, the big ones are kind of easy to do, easy on the alcohol. Work out every day and so on. But after that, to me, it seems like the margins get pretty thin about what effects they have. You should eat this or that, or the dietary supplements, or the Ray Kurzweil thing. He takes 70 supplements a day. And it's like, oh, I just saw he's been making the rounds because he has a new book out. The Singularity is nearer. It's coming soon. And, frankly, he does. I mean, he's like 10 years older than me, and he looks 10 years older than me. I don't know. I don't know if that kind of stuff really works.
I was on a podcast with a wonderful guy, a doctor and an athlete named Peter Attia.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you probably know him. It's a very
That's right. He
smart
knows
guy.
all this stuff. He's into all this stuff.
Well, he wrote a book about longevity, which is probably why I won't, but it has a wonderfully competitive title. It's called Outlive.
Outlive, yes.
I was like, wow, that's what happens with athletes. Athletes write about longevity. They call it Outlive. I really like that. I completely understood where he was coming from.
Yeah. Yeah, but so much of that is depending on studies with small n's, and there's a slight effect if you take curcumin and you drink the coffee, you don't drink the coffee. You have this a tiny effect maybe, and it's like I don't know.
Well, the large effects are avoid drinking. I don't drink at all. I have the very very occasional cigarette with a friend. That's it, and I exercise every day. And I eat a really healthy sort of Mediterranean diet, right? And those are sort of the big ones, right? And then the other big one is genetics. So, of course, circle back, rewind time, find different parents if yours didn't live very long. And,
But it's like the calorie restriction thing that was big in the 80s and 90s, and that just didn't pan out. But even if it did, I don't want to be hungry most of the time for most of my life so that I can live an extra 10 years at the end.
Right. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, one probably a very good measure of longevity is core strength and if you're overweight or not. Right. I
Yeah,
mean, just
yeah.
as you're drinking too many soft drinks, you're going to be overweight and you're at risk of diabetes and all kinds of other stuff. Right. So, but if you can do a plank for a minute and a half and you can jog a couple of miles and you're trim, if you got the same belt loop as you had in college, you're more likely to live, past the average than if you can't, fit into your college belt loop.
Yeah, let's see. I was at 32. I'm now at 33, 34. I guess
Yeah.
that's close.
Yep.
The
Not bad.
problem is beer. I like beer and wine. Just, one
Yeah.
that with dinner, maybe.
Yeah.
I
I
know I
get
should
it. Yeah.
shouldn't have any. The docs
Yeah.
say no, none. Like
Yeah.
none.
I don't drink at all. I haven't had a sip in 10 years and I stopped. I had atrial fibrillation, which is a sort of electrical problem in the heart. It's rather random, and I didn't want to have an ablation to fix it, where they stick a tube in your in your groin, up your femoral, into your heart. Thank you, and burn a circle around the little problem area. Thank you, no. So the doctor said, if you want to avoid an ablation, why don't you try not drinking at all, because alcohol could trigger AFib. And so I didn't drink for a month. It had zero effect on the AFib, which it always would get triggered when I exercised. And but at the end of a month, I loved the way I felt. And I found this, for my personality, it was way easier to not drink at all than to just have one drink. Like it just too much effort to have one drink and then start saying no. So I just don't drink at all. I don't think twice about it. And I got to say, I'm completely, I'm a completely sober person, right? I don't even have a smartphone. I'm digitally sober.
You are?
Yeah, I have a flip phone. I mean, I
Oh,
don't do
wow.
all that social media stuff. I just like zero, like all those addictive behaviors that you see around smartphones. I don't have those either. Like, and it's a wonderfully liberating way to live.
I just tried something new that I hadn't tried before that seems to work. Cold plunge. Have you tried the cold plunge thing yet?
No, I've heard about it. I haven't
Oh,
done
yeah.
it.
It's like 42 degrees, and you go in there for like 1 minute or 2 minutes, and it appears to shock the body into thinking it's dying, and it releases all these chemicals that makes you feel really good, but not just feel good. It's supposed to be good for like healing or inflammation, particularly inflammation. Inflammation, a tea, I think, talks about inflammation as one of
Yeah.
these things that's, bad for longevity.
I'll try anything as long as I don't see my dead father again.
There you go. Yeah. No more near-death experiences. All right, Sebastian, thank you so much for talking to me. I love this subject. It's hard to find something more important and touching than this. So thanks for doing that.
It was a treat talking to you. It was a really fun conversation. Thanks for reading my book and inviting me on.